we had mentioned the soul is pure in the most pure form. The body is made of earth. It's coarse, it's earthy, it's unrefined in terms of has no relevance to spirituality. As a result of the soul, one is able to take initiative to invest the physicality in the spiritual realm. The soul doesn't become more pure, but the soul itself, two things are happening. The body is engaged in a spiritual process, which automatically has an effect which upgrades and refines the physicality of the body, that it's less earthy, it's more refined, has greater relevance to the spiritual realm. In addition, the soul taking that initiative and not allowing it to be overwhelmed by the physicality of the body, the soul itself doesn't become more pure, but it expands. It becomes more holy. It becomes holier due to taking that action. After resurrection, the soul itself is reinserted in the body. The soul itself, when it leaves the body, what happens to the soul? It goes to the soul world, which is a holding pattern. It's a holding pattern until God's ready to resurrect the person, to reunite the soul with the body that initially was involved in every challenge of the person's life. When that soul, which now has expanded in the spiritual realm and magnifies due to the infusion of the spirituality through its lifetime, when it enters into the body, what does it do to the body? It brings about the ultimate objective that the physicality is totally spiritualized instantaneously. In our lifetime, God, we mentioned, suppresses the intensity of that spirituality. Because if he didn't, the balance between good and evil wouldn't be there. The soul would overwhelm the physicality of the body. Because the soul being something which is borders on the infinite, and the body being the ultimate and finite, there's not even a challenge. The soul would definitely overwhelm the body and spiritualize it. So God has to suppress that innate holiness of the soul to maintain the balance. But once the soul leaves the body and the person himself is able now to be a beneficiary of all the good that he chose to evolve in through his lifetime, the soul expands. It expands at a level which is unfathomable in the spiritual realm. When it comes back in the body, it comes back in the expanded form. So the moment it goes into the body, it spiritualizes the body at a level that the body radiates no less than the soul radiates. This is just reviewing and a synopsis on what we spoke about until now. You know, environment is essential and basic to our behavior. There's a famous word from the Chinuch, who's a codifier, an earlier codifier, almost a contemporary of Rambam. He writes that there is a mitzvah to eat the Paschal Lamb on Pesach, known as the Korban Pesach. And eating means you have to eat the volume of an olive of meat. That's the Torah obligation. The marrow in a bone is considered meat. The Torah tells us you're not permitted to break the bone of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal lamb, to extract the marrow from the bone. Although the marrow is meat, but to break the bone, to extract the marrow, that you're not permitted to do. And if you do, it's a negative violation. if you break the bone to extract the marrow. So the Chinuch writes, who's the codifier, he gives us a philosophical understanding of why the Torah doesn't want you to break the bone, to extract the meat, the marrow. So he says, when we celebrate Pesach, Passover, what are we celebrating? We were slaves, now we're free men. Redemption. Who breaks the bone to take out the marrow? It's the behavior of a dog. Dogs gnaw on bones. Human beings don't gnaw on bones. So since you're in the posture at this moment is to be and demonstrate and depict yourself as a free man, by breaking the bone, you're acting like a slave, like a dog. This does not allow you to be a beneficiary of the freedom of being a free man. Therefore, the Torah says you're not permitted to break the bone, to gnaw on the bone, to take out the marrow. This is the Chinuch. So the Chinuch says, but you could ask, does it really make a difference? If I'm a free man, I'm a free man. Does it make a difference if I break the bone and I don't break the bone? Is the breaking the bone going to make me, it's going to somehow undermine my ability to be a free man? So the Chinuch writes, he says, that question is only as a result of not being experienced in life. Man is a product of his actions. The way we behave, this is what we become. And in his words, he says, Odom nifal kfi polosav. A man is formed and develops based on his actions. If you gnaw the bone, you become like the dog. Meaning that becomes your behavior pattern. And since the 15th of Nisan, we are free men, and we have to demonstrate that by chewing the bone, breaking the bone to take the marrow, that will diminish and interfere with us developing and being impacted by the moment of freedom. That's the Chinuch. So environment is crucial. The way we live our lives, what we're exposed to, that exposure will make a difference in how we behave. And therefore, the Rambam writes, if a person lives in a community of evil people, and if you stay there, it's inevitable, the influence will change your life negatively. You have an obligation to leave that community. He says, even if it means you have to go into the desert and live in a cave, not to be exposed to that negative behavior, that's your obligation. Because if you don't and you remain there, there's going to be a certain subliminal influence, and ultimately, you're going to become a different person. Not even realizing you became that different person. And he gives an example. The Chinuch. A person's a tzaddik. A true, devout tzaddik. And people go and they coerce him and force him to violate the Torah in multiple ways, on a continuous basis. That tzaddik will ultimately become an evil person. Because since through the conditioning of behavior, even though it's against his will, but ultimately it will compromise him. And he'll become a Rasha, he'll become an evil person. And you take the Rasha, the evil person, and you force him to do acts of righteousness over an extended period of time. Ultimately that Rasha has become a tzaddik. Because man is a product of his actions. Negative or positive. You are a product of your actions. That's a reality of life. The soul, when it departs from the human being, it goes to the soul world. Now it's in its so-called habitat. Now it's in its environment. Being in its environment, it could expand and be a beneficiary of all the infusions of mitzvahs throughout his lifetime. So the soul is unfathomable in terms of the extent of its holiness, breadth, depth, and everything about it. Now you have this little measly body that's going to be reincarnated, resurrected. You take this mega soul, which mega is an understatement, you put it into that body, which is made of earthy material. The moment it goes in there, it totally subsumes the physicality of that body, the body itself becomes an entity of holiness, of spirituality. That's what happens. And the body has the capacity for that. The body was created to be spiritualized. And the semblance of this, he says, you find Moshe Rabbeinu. Before he passed away, the Torah tells us he radiated holiness. Why did he radiate holiness? Why do we radiate holiness? Because the soul, the body, was so fully invested in spirituality, the physicality became spiritualized. As a result of that, it was opaque. The holiness of the soul shone through the body, because the body itself also had a spiritual dimension due to being fully invested in spirituality throughout Moshe's life. For that reason, that's why he radiated. The radiance of the soul shone through the body, because the body itself was no longer a blockage, because the body itself was had a semblance of what the soul was. That's the understanding. The Minchas tells us that when Adam was created, Adam was the handiwork of God. He radiated a holiness because of the dimension of his soul. This is before eating of the tree of knowledge. That the angels had mistaken his radiance for the radiance of God. And just as the angels sing the praises of God, they started singing the praises of Adam, thinking that this radiance was emanating from God. That was the level of his holiness of the soul. The body yet wasn't putrefied with the evil of the tree of knowledge. His soul did not sin yet. So as a result of that, the radiance was so intense and overwhelming that the angels, they began singing praise, God's praises to this person. But after he ate of the tree of knowledge, which possesses evil, which is the counterforce against holiness, it was considered as if the soul was extinguished to a degree. The body was extinguished. It lost its capacity. As a result of that, he no longer radiated that level of radiance. He radiated, but not that level of radiance. Now the angels understood the difference between Adam and God himself. Now Yaakov, Jacob the patriarch, was the most special of the three patriarchs. When you would see him, would you see a radiance? Well, evidently not. When a person has a radiance, you realize not everybody could see that radiance. You have to be privy for that radiance. You yourself have to be a special level to be able to see that radiance. I'll give you an example. When Avram was told to take his son, to bind him, bring him as a sacrifice, it was a 3-day trek to Mount Moriah. That's where Avram built the altar to sacrifice Yitzchak. He had taken 2 people besides the son with him, Eliezer and Yishmael, who rode on a donkey. When they were at a certain distance from the mountain, Avram says to Yishmael and Eliezer, do you see anything? Besides the mountain, do you see anything? They said, no, we see nothing. He says to Yitzchak, what do you see? He says, I see a cloud right above the mountain. That's what I see. And Avram saw the cloud too. Yishmael and Eliezer did not see that cloud. What do you mean? Is it because it was lacking? They didn't have the vision? They didn't have the acuity of vision to be able to see it? No. To be able to see something in the spiritual realm, you have to have spiritual eyes. That they weren't able to see, that meant they were not meant to be present at the time of the Akedah. Yitzchak, who was able to see it, that meant he was at that level to be the object of the sacrifice. They, because they had so many other issues between the two of them, regardless of what they were not privy for this, because their eyes, their souls were not sufficiently spiritualized to be able to sense, to see whatever that is above that mountain, which was clouds, an intensity of clouds together. I always mention, you find that when Pharaoh's daughter had noticed a box floating in the Nile, she retrieves it immediately, opens it up, and she sees a little 3-month-old baby in this box crying. And it says, and she saw him. She saw him. If she opened the box, it's evidence she saw him. What did she saw him? So Rashi cites the Midrash. She saw the Shekhinah, the divine presence with Moshe in the box. So they knew this is not an ordinary child. This is a child, the divine presence is present together with him in the box. Now, if she saw it, if we would see it, will we notice it? Probably not. It's only because Paro's daughter was that special level. Because it says she went to immerse herself in the Nile to cleanse herself from idolatry. She became monotheist at that moment. And after she became monotheist, she locates the box. So she was at a special level. When she opened it, she saw the Shekhinah with Moshe. They tell over a story, as Rabbi Yisrael Salanta had a Rebbe who mentored him. His name was Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salant. The Chavetz Chaim had a Rebbe who mentored him. And his name was Reb Nochum Haronka. Reb Nochum. Who was this Reb Nochum? If you ever see a picture of him, he's a man who wore a fisherman's cap, ordinary garb, like a laborer in Europe in the 1800s. And the Chavetz Chaim, as a child, was a child prodigy. He had a photographic memory, and he was about 15, 16 years old. And he was an orphan when he was a little boy, and he felt he needed a teacher to mentor him in areas, in the Kabbalistic areas which he had nobody available to teach him. And he suspected that this Reb Nochum, who was the shamus in the shul where he davened as 14, 15-year-old, he was the shamus. He was the sexton in the shul. After the service was over, he put the books back in the bookshelf, straighten up, clean up, and that's what he would do. But the Chavetz Chaim, as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old boy, suspected there's something special about him. Why? Because every night after the Ma'ariv service was finished, everybody would leave. He'd close the shades, lock the door, nobody could come in. And he suspected there's something going on there. The Chavetz Chaim suspected there's something going on. Okay? So he goes and he hides. He hides in the shul, and Reb Nochum, who's the shamus, doesn't realize somebody's hiding. Everybody leaves, he looks around, nobody's there, puts away the books, he goes up to the bima, and he starts saying certain things which are not understandable to the Chavetz Chaim, Kabbalistic types of statements. As soon as he starts saying these Kabbalistic statements, the shul lights up and like an inferno is there. It looks like the building's going to burn down. There's a glow emanating from this Reb Nochum and from the walls. They're like pulsating with holiness. Chavetz Chaim never saw anything like this. And he knew for a fact when he saw this was a confirmation that Reb Nochum is one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim, and he wants to be his Rebbe. He should be his teacher. Soon afterwards, all of a sudden, the Chavetz Chaim comes out of his hiding place. This Reb Nochum is shocked that somebody witnessed what happened. He says, I want you to be my teacher. And he accepted to be his teacher. This is Reb Nochum. So when Reb Aaron Kotler heard the story that Reb Nochum Haradna radiated, he said, I'm not impressed that he radiated. It's understood. He was a holy man. He was known. But I was impressed that the Chavetz Chaim at the age of 16 was able to see that radiance. Because not everybody's privy to that radiance. Reb Nochum Haranka, he was a holy man. So therefore, when he prayed and he said certain things, he generated that energy that brought the divine presence. But Chavetz Chaim's a young boy, 15 years old, that he should be privy at 6 and be able to see it, it's amazing. That's what it's about. So Basia, the daughter of Param, when she saw that Shekhinah, what does it say about her? That she was privy to see it. That tells her who she was. That she was sufficiently spiritualized, that she was worthy to see the divine presence. Okay, leave some time for a few comments, and we will continue.